What's up everybody, it's Matt from the house, and in this video we're going to show you just a few of our favorite men's all mountain boards for the 22-23 season. Let's check these out. All right, first up we have the Gnu GWO, the Gnu World Order. So pretty rad board. This is kind of that beginner to intermediate style board. Definitely something that's going to push you to get better. They do their classic rocker with just a light camber in the nose and tail. That way you get that nice, easy catch-free feel, but you still get a lot of float. And with that camber, it still gives a little bit of power in and out of your turns, especially when you start to ride faster and harder. It also has their magnet traction on the side where they get that little wiggle down the edge, so it basically grips like a steak knife and rips into those harder, icier conditions. And then inside this thing, we're doing a mixed glass. So we got one layer of biax and one layer of triax. So you get a little bit of easier, smoother feel of the biaxial, but you still get that push back and that snap and pop of the triaxial glass. And then on the bottom of this thing, we have an extruded base. So a base that basically requires little maintenance, but keeps it fast. But this is definitely a great all mountain, go anywhere twin tip board to really get you going and really push you to get better. All right, next up we have the Lib Tech TRS. This is probably one of the best-selling Lib Tech boards of all time. TRS stands for Total Ripper Series, which means it will ride park, powder, and everywhere in between. It does have their C3, so it is camber dominant with a slight rocker in the middle, so we get all the power and that aggressiveness of the camber, but we get a little bit of that tipping point for the deeper snow. Also, when we go to get this thing on edge, it puts the middle of the board down a little bit, so it gets on edge and grabs in the middle a little bit quicker. And then inside this thing, we are doing a mixed glass. So again, we get the best of that biaxial and triaxial. Basically get a board that's nice and poppy and snappy and stable, but still has a real smooth feel in and out of your turns. And then in addition to that, we also have the bamboo boosters underneath your feet to add even more stability and edge hold to the board, and the basalt alloy inserts to give it even more spring and more pop. So definitely a twin tip board for that aggressive rider who again wants to ride anywhere from the park to the powder. All right, and next up we have the Evol Skiba Pro model. If you've never seen Skiba ride, check the description down below. We'll leave a link to his video, but Skiba wanted a board for doing Skiba things, and this is exactly what this thing is. We basically have got a twin tip board, so it's super versatile, whether you're in the park or out of the park. Traditional camber from tip to tail, so basically get that nice power in between your legs. It's super aggressive feel where the board always wants to be on edge. A little bit more of a medium flex on this thing, so it can handle itself no matter where you're riding. And then inside we've got that blended glass with the carbon, so we're basically having a board that's going to be very predictable, very smooth riding, but when you need to unload this thing off at jumps, ollieing it, and even when you're laying down some hard carves, the board can push back and actually feel like a stiffer board when you need it to feel like a stiffer board, and feel like a softer board when you want it to feel like a softer board. And if that wasn't enough, we've got that nice hardwood core on this thing, which is adding even more stability, more pop, more spring, and longevity to the board. And then of course on the bottom, we gotta keep things going fast. We've got a centered base. Definitely that twin tip board that rules the park all day long, but can take you anywhere on the mountain. All right, and then next up we have the Santa Cruz JP Walker snowboard. This thing is pretty rad. JP is obviously known for his street riding, but that dude rides the backcountry just as good as he rides the streets, and this board actually does all of that. The first thing you notice about this thing is that it is incredibly lightweight, and the flex on it actually feels really good. It's not too soft, not too stiff. It's kind of right in between, so you can ride this thing absolutely everywhere. It is a traditional camber. It has a very light camber in the middle of the board, so you get that extra power and that extra snap, but not too much, so you still get a lot of stability. Inside the board, we're doing a triax fiberglass, so super springy, super poppy, which is one of those things that you would expect the board to feel a little bit stiffer because of that triax, but again, because of the core they're using and the fiberglass, you kind of get the best of both worlds. Does have a centered base on this thing, keeping it nice and fast, and I should mention it also is a twin tip shape, so obviously it's going to ride the same regular that it does switch. And then the really cool thing about this board that's the most notable is their HCM Plus core. It's a core that has a nice easy feel, but torsionally in and out of your turns, it's actually very stable. So it's a board that kind of, the more you're pushing in and out of your turns, it's going to give you that push, but it actually feels really smooth. All right, and the next up from Public, we have Lemmens' new board, the Statement. This is an insane board. All mountain, go anywhere, do anything. If you haven't watched Koss ride, dude is insane. He does some of the most creative and some of the biggest street riding stuff you've ever seen. But this board is not just for the streets. It rides absolutely everywhere. It has kind of a medium to soft flex on it, so it's not super crazy stiff. Something that still has a lot of zing and a lot of pop, especially since they added a couple stringers in the nose and the tail, kind of right where you'd put the wheels of a skateboard truck basically, so you really get a lot of power and a lot of snap and pop. And then even when you're pushing back on this thing and you're in your carves, it actually wants to hold an edge a lot more than most of your traditional kind of medium soft flexing boards. It does have a biaxial fiberglass inside and a sintered base on the bottom, keeping it nice and fast. And then the bend on this thing is pretty cool too. It actually has a camber to a flat area, so you get that all that power, that camber, but then instead of going all the way to the contact point, you actually have a little bit of a flat spot in the front there. And that basically is so when you stand on this thing, it kind of unweights the board and lifts it up a little bit, so you get that catch-free feel, but also it gives you a little bit more of a flat spot, so when you are buttering around or you're riding on rails and boxes, if you're pressing on the nose or leaning back on the tail, you get a little bit more stability and a little bit more of that flatter spot to sit on. And then this board is also somewhat of a mid-wide board. It's a little bit wider than a traditional board. It's not quite a wide board, but it will handle those boots in that 12, 13 range, no problem, but it's not too wide for some of those smaller boots. All right, and then last up, we have the Capita Indoor Survival. So this board's actually been around for a long time, and it used to be a little bit more of that beginner to intermediate board, but it really has gotten a makeover in the last couple of years, and they've really souped this thing up because everybody really liked the shape of it. It is a directional twin, so obviously we have a slight directional shape to it, but you're never gonna notice it when you're riding switch. They do a camber to flat, so we basically have got all the power of the camber, but then they do it to a little bit of a flat area for two reasons. One, when you step down on it, it helps lift up the tips to give you a little bit of that catch-free feel. But also, when you are pressing on boxes and rails, and even when you're buttering around in the snow, it adds a little bit of stability up in that nose or in the tail. And then inside this thing, we are doing the ever-popular mixed glassing. So again, we get the best of biax and triax, snappy, poppy, and still smooth. And then in addition to that, they have their Titanal booster, and it's basically this metal piece that actually runs through the board from tip to tail, adding even more stability and a lot of snap and pop, and it really doesn't add any weight to the board either. And then of course on the bottom of this thing, they want to keep it nice and fast, so they're doing their quantum drive base. All right, so obviously that was just 5 of the amazing collection of all mountain snowboards that we have at thehouse.com. But if you got any questions about these or any of the boards on the website, definitely leave some comments down below. We're on there every single day trying to answer your questions. We want to make sure we get you into some rad gear, but most importantly, we want to make sure that it's actually going to fit you and it's going to fit your specific riding style. Also, make sure to like, subscribe, definitely get that bell on too so you can find out when all the new videos drop. Grab yourself a new board and get out and ride, because any day riding is a good day riding. What's up, everybody?